In 2025, something happened that had not happened in more than a decade. Tesla lost its crown as the world's largest seller of fully electric cars. Not in one city, not in one country, globally. The company that took it sold over 2 million electric cars in a single year, more than 600,000 more than Tesla. And most Americans cannot even tell you how to pronounce its name. That company is BYD. And here is the detail that makes this story almost impossible to believe until you see it for yourself. BYD's cheapest car costs about $10,000. $10,000. That is less than what a lot of people pay for a used pickup truck with 200,000 miles on it. And that $10,000 car comes standard, no upgrade, no extra charge, with the same kind of advanced driver assistance technology that Tesla, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz charge you thousands of dollars to unlock. BYD did not just add this feature to a few flagship models to generate headlines. They put it across their entire lineup, from the cheapest hatchback they sell all the way up to their luxury performance brand. One announcement, and overnight, a feature that used to be a premium upsell became something every buyer simply got for free. So how does a company most people in the United States have never heard of end up outselling the most famous electric car brand on the planet while giving away technology that competitors still charge a premium for? The answer is not luck, and it is not a fluke of timing. It is the result of 3 decades of decisions that almost nobody outside the industry was paying attention to. A battery built in secret that changed the safety conversation around electric cars overnight. A level of in-house manufacturing control that almost no other car company on Earth has matched. And a charging breakthrough that adds 250 miles of range in about 5 minutes. By the time we get through this story, you are going to understand exactly why the global auto industry is nervous. Exactly what it means for the next car sitting in your driveway. Most people hear the name BYD and assume it is a car company that got lucky. That assumption is the first thing you need to throw out, because it is exactly backwards. BYD did not start as a car company that later figured out batteries. It started as a battery company that, almost 2 decades later, figured out cars. The story begins in 1995, in Shenzhen, China, inside a small battery workshop that had nothing close to the size or ambition of what BYD would eventually become. The founder, Wang Chuanfu, was a chemist, not a businessman with a flashy pitch deck. He raised roughly $300,000 in startup capital, and his plan was almost stubbornly simple. He wanted to manufacture rechargeable batteries cheaper than anyone else alive. There was nothing glamorous about how he did it. Wang took apart Japanese-made batteries piece by piece, studied every component, and worked out how to rebuild the same performance using cheaper materials and a more efficient process. It was not the kind of origin story that gets told on a stage at a tech conference. It was a chemist in a workshop, breaking things down to their smallest parts and figuring out how to build them back up for less money without quietly cutting corners on quality. That obsessive, component-level discipline is the thread that runs through every single thing BYD has built since. It worked faster than almost anyone could have predicted. By the year 2000, BYD had become the largest manufacturer of nickel-cadmium batteries in the entire world. 2 years after that, they were the largest lithium-ion battery supplier on the planet, not top 5. Number 1. In less than a decade, a small workshop in Shenzhen had become one of the most important suppliers in the entire global battery industry, and they had not built a single car yet. They were building the thing that would eventually power almost every electric vehicle on the planet, the chemistry and the core technology itself, and they were doing it at a scale and a cost level that nobody else in the industry could match. The move into cars came in 2003, when BYD quietly acquired a struggling Chinese automaker. There was no big press conference, no grand unveiling. They simply bought a manufacturer, started learning the car business from the inside out, and kept building. Then, in 2008, something happened that made a lot of seasoned investors raise an eyebrow. Warren Buffett, one of the most cautious and famously patient investors alive, had his company, Berkshire Hathaway, invest $232 million for a roughly 10% stake in BYD. At the time, plenty of people thought it was a strange bet. A Chinese battery company trying to break into the car business was barely a blip on the radar of the global auto industry. Buffett did not get lucky. He saw something in the structure of the company that most analysts simply were not paying attention to yet. He saw a company that did not just make cars. They made almost everything that goes inside a car. And that single fact became the foundation for everything BYD has built ever since. Within a little over a decade, that stake had grown to be worth several $billion, a return that very few bets in the history of the auto industry can match. To understand why that foundation matters so much, you need to understand what it lets a company do when the rest of the world hits a wall. Here's something most car companies simply do not do. When a traditional automaker needs a computer chip for a new vehicle, they call a supplier on the other side of the world and wait. Sometimes that wait is measured in weeks. Sometimes it stretches into months. That is not an exaggeration, and it is not theoretical. During the pandemic, when global supply chains seized up, major American automakers had to shut down entire assembly lines. Thousands of workers were sent home. Billions of dollars were lost. Not because anyone ran out of steel or rubber or glass, but because they could not get a chip the size of a fingernail out of a factory on the other side of the planet. When BYD needed chips during that same period, they turned to their own chip division. Problem solved in a matter of hours instead of months. BYD manufactures its own batteries, its own motors, its own chips, much of its own steel and glass, and yes, even the foam that goes inside its car seats. From raw material to finished vehicle, an enormous share of the process happens inside their own walls. That kind of structure is called vertical integration, and the level BYD has taken it to is extraordinarily rare in this industry. Building that kind of capability properly takes at least a decade. Once you have it, your competitors need another decade just to start closing the gap. Most Western automakers are still at the very beginning of that journey, drafting plans for factories that will not even be finished for years. The cost advantage this creates is enormous. When you make your own components, you cut out layer after layer of supplier profit margins stacked on top of each other. You're not held hostage by a single overseas factory if something goes wrong. You control your own timeline, your own quality, and your own pricing. And when you're trying to sell a $10,000 car, every dollar you save in production is a dollar that helps make that price possible in the first place. But the single biggest weapon BYD built in-house is something called the blade battery. And this is where the story stops being about spreadsheets and starts being about something the entire battery industry could not ignore. BYD developed the blade battery largely in secret and launched it publicly in 2020. And it forced the rest of the battery world to sit up and pay attention in a way that very few product announcements ever managed to do. Here is how a typical electric car battery works. You take a large number of small battery cells, pack them into modules, and then stack those modules into a bigger battery pack. Picture small boxes packed into medium boxes, packed into one big box. It works, but it is full of extra layers, extra complexity, and extra wasted space between all of those components. BYD threw that whole system out. The blade battery skips the middle layer entirely. The individual cells slide directly into the pack, side by side, like a row of blades lined up in a drawer. That single design change made the battery roughly 50% more space efficient. It simplified the manufacturing process, and it reduced the number of components that could fail. But the moment that really proved the technology came down to a single, brutal test called the nail penetration test. The name tells you exactly what it is. You take a fully charged battery pack and drive a steel nail straight through it, simulating the kind of serious puncture damage that could happen in a bad crash. Most lithium-ion batteries, when you do this, will smoke, swell, or catch fire outright. The internal heat builds fast, and once it starts, it spreads. BYD's blade battery did none of those things. The temperature barely moved, no fire. No smoke, it passed clean. Other battery formats used by competing manufacturers, including some used by Tesla in earlier years, did not handle that same test nearly as well. BYD made sure the rest of the industry knew it. That battery now sits inside every BYD vehicle, from their cheapest $10,000 hatchback all the way up to their luxury and performance brands. One core piece of technology, refined over years, deployed at a scale almost nobody else can touch, and never licensed out to competitors, which means every other manufacturer is still working to catch up with chemistry and design decisions BYD quietly locked in years before the public ever heard the word blade. The blade battery did not just solve a technical problem, it created a structural cost and safety advantage that BYD has been compounding on top of ever since. Combine that with the vertical integration that lets them build it cheaper than almost anyone else, and a $10,000 car with free driver assistance technology stops looking like a marketing stunt. It starts looking like the natural result of 3 decades of advantages stacking on top of each other. Now let's put some real numbers on this, because the actual scale of what BYD has built does not fully land until you see the data side by side. In 2024, BYD sold roughly 4.25 million vehicles worldwide when you combine fully electric cars and plug-in hybrids, an increase of around 41% compared to the year before. Of that total, about 1.76 million were fully electric. Their full-year revenue crossed the $100 billion mark for the first time in company history, and net profit came in at around $5.5 billion, roughly a third from the year before. For context, that same year, BYD's revenue in dollar terms actually pulled ahead of Tesla's for the first time. Those are not the numbers of a scrappy startup trying to survive long enough to matter. Those are the numbers of a mature, profitable industrial machine that is still accelerating. Now look at the other side of that comparison. Multiple major American automakers have reported billions of dollars in losses on their electric vehicle divisions over the past 2 years, even as they pour tens of billions of dollars into retooling factories and developing new platforms. These are not small or careless companies. They are some of the most experienced automakers in the history of the industry, but their EV divisions have been bleeding money while BYD's entire operation keeps printing it. Those two financial trajectories are pointed in opposite directions, and the gap between them has been widening, not closing. That momentum did not slow down once the calendar turned. In the first quarter of 2025 alone, BYD sold over 1 million vehicles combining electric and plug-in hybrid models, an increase of almost 60% compared to the same quarter the year before. By the time the full year wrapped up, BYD had sold more than 4.5 million vehicles in total, and for the first time in over a decade, more fully electric cars in a single year than Tesla. Tesla's global deliveries actually declined that year. BYD's overseas sales, the portion sold outside of China, surpassed 1 million units for the first time in company history. This is the part that tends to get lost in the noise. It was not one lucky quarter or one viral announcement that pushed BYD past Tesla. It was 4 straight years of steady, compounding growth, finally crossing a line that almost nobody in the industry expected to see crossed this soon. Then came February of 2025, and BYD dropped an announcement that hit the auto industry like a bucket of ice water. They confirmed that their advanced driver assistance system called God's Eye would become standard equipment across their entire vehicle lineup. Every car, every price point, no upgrade required, no extra charge. The company's chairman stood on stage and said plainly that 2025 would be remembered as the first year that intelligent driving became available to everyone, not just buyers who could afford a luxury price tag. This is not a basic lane-keeping beep that nudges you back between the lines. Depending on the tier, God's Eye handles adaptive cruise control, automated parking, lane centering, and highway driving assistance, with the top tier built around multiple LiDAR sensors, capable of supporting navigation on city streets, not just highways. These are the kinds of features that other manufacturers bundle into premium packages that can add thousands of dollars to the final price of a car. BYD put a version of this technology into a car that cost under $10,000 in its home market and called it standard equipment. Shares of BYD jumped to a record high within a day of the announcement. Shares of some of its closest domestic rivals dropped on the same news because the entire competitive landscape had just shifted under their feet. And BYD was not finished, because in March of 2025, they made another announcement, this one about charging, and the number they put on the table made engineers at competing companies visibly uncomfortable. 5 minutes of charging, roughly 250 miles of range. To understand why that number matters so much, think about the single biggest reason people hesitate before switching to an electric car. It is not really the price anymore, and it is not the way the cars look. It is the weight. Sitting at a charging station for 30 or 45 minutes while other cars pull in, charge, and leave feels completely different from pulling into a gas station, filling up in a few minutes, and driving straight off. The difference is a real psychological barrier, and it has kept a lot of people from making the switch. 5 minutes of charging does not just shrink that barrier, it nearly erases it. You plug in, you grab a coffee, you get back in the car, and you are gone with 250 more miles of range in the tank. BYD demonstrated this working in the real world, not in a lab and not in a rendering. The system runs on a new platform built around 1,000 volts and roughly 1,000 amps, supported by a newly developed silicon carbide power chip and a redesigned battery with dramatically lower internal resistance. Those numbers are well beyond what most existing charging networks around the world were ever built to deliver, which is exactly why BYD is now building out its own dedicated network of ultra-fast charging stations across China to support it, with plans to install thousands of them. The flagship sedan riding on this new platform can sprint from a stop to highway speed in under 3 seconds, supercar territory, built on the very same technological foundation as some of BYD's most affordable vehicles. One technology stack, refined to an extreme level, then spread across nearly everything the company sells. Here's the part of this story that most coverage in the United States quietly skips over, and it matters a great deal. BYD is not selling passenger cars in the United States right now, but they are selling in more than 100 countries across 6 continents, and the way they are moving through those markets reveals a strategy that is far more patient and deliberate than most people realize. In Europe, BYD's growth has been fast enough that it has rattled some of the continent's biggest legacy automakers, with Volkswagen announcing factory adjustments in Germany, partly tied to the broader pressure created by cheaper, increasingly capable Chinese competitors. The European Union responded by placing tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles, with the rate varying by manufacturer based on how much state subsidy support investigators believed each company received. BYD's rate landed around 17%, lower than some of its domestic rivals, while the least cooperative Chinese manufacturers faced tariffs above 35%. BYD's answer to the tariff wall was not to retreat. It was to start building a factory in Hungary to manufacture cars locally and sidestep a large share of the tariff altogether. That is not a company that backs down when a door closes. That is a company that goes looking for the window. In Australia, BYD has become one of the fastest selling electric vehicle brands the country has ever recorded. Across Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam, the company holds a dominant position. In Brazil, BYD is converting a former Ford manufacturing plant into one of its own. And in Mexico, BYD launched its first pickup truck, called the Shark, a plug-in hybrid model that has reportedly sold well enough to catch the direct attention of Ford's own chief executive, who publicly acknowledged that BYD's truck is a serious, well-built product, and that any company that wants to remain a global player in pickups is going to have to compete with it. BYD has also been laying the groundwork for vehicle assembly in Mexico. That detail raises a very specific question in Detroit. If BYD eventually manufactures cars on Mexican soil, those vehicles could potentially qualify under North American trade rules in ways that change how the full weight of existing tariffs applies. The wall protecting the American market is real, but factories can be built on the right side of a border, and trade rules are not permanent fixtures carved into stone. Here's the detail that surprises most people most of all. BYD is not just a competitor standing outside the American auto industry. In important ways, it is already woven into it. BYD has an established joint venture with Toyota that produces electric vehicles together inside China. The company's lithium iron phosphate battery technology already powers vehicles from Tesla, Stellantis, Mercedes-Benz, and Toyota in various markets. And reports surfaced that Ford itself has been in talks with BYD about sourcing battery technology for some of its future hybrid models. The separation between BYD and the American auto industry is already thinner than the tariff wall makes it appear from the outside. None of this global maneuvering, the factory in Hungary, the plant in Brazil, the pickup truck in Mexico, the supply relationships with Toyota, Stellantis, Mercedes, and quiet conversations with Ford, is accidental. It is a company executing a strategy one calculated move at a time. And understanding what that strategy is doing to car buyers everywhere, including the ones who will likely never own a BYD, is where this story becomes genuinely important. So here is the honest, practical answer to the question a lot of people are quietly asking right now. Does any of this actually matter if BYD is not selling cars in your country? Yes, and in ways you can already measure in real dollars. Tesla has cut prices multiple times over the past few years, not purely out of generosity, but under serious competitive pressure, and BYD has been a significant part of that pressure. Several major American automakers have trimmed prices on their own electric models and pushed hard to launch more affordable EVs, specifically because Chinese competition made it clear that lower price points were actually achievable without abandoning profit margins entirely. If you have been waiting for electric vehicle prices to come down further before you buy, BYD is one of the primary forces pushing that timeline forward, whether you ever cross paths with one of their cars or not. Think about why that matters in very concrete terms. A car company does not lower its prices because it feels generous. It lowers prices when it is staring at a competitor that can build the same car for less money and still turn a profit. Once BYD proved that a modern, well-equipped electric car could be built and sold profitably at a price point that used to seem impossible, every other manufacturer suddenly had a number they could not pretend did not exist. Engineers and finance teams inside Western automakers have had to go back and ask a hard question. If BYD can hit this price with this much technology inside the car, why can we not get anywhere close? That question alone has reshaped product planning meetings at companies that have never sold a single BYD-branded vehicle and never will. For truck and SUV buyers, who make up the majority of American car buyers, direct BYD competition remains limited for now. Their lineup leans heavily toward sedans and compact crossovers, and the cultural weight that a pickup truck carries in America, the towing, the payload, the identity wrapped up in it, is not something BYD is challenging head-on today. But the success of the Shark in markets like Mexico shows the company understands that segment and is actively learning it. The truck market is not permanently protected. It simply has a longer runway before that pressure arrives at full force. For anyone who loves cars purely for the engineering, it is worth knowing about BYD's performance sub-brand, Yangwang. Their supercar, the U9, distributes power across 4 separate motors, one for each wheel, with control precise enough that the car has demonstrated lifting all 4 wheels simultaneously off the ground on command, not in a rendering, but on stage in front of cameras. Their flagship luxury SUV, the U8, has demonstrated rotating in place on its own axis and operating on 3 wheels with 1 axle disabled. These are not promises for some distant future model year. These are things the cars have already been shown doing. That level of engineering ambition does not come from a company simply trying to meet a compliance checklist. It comes from a company that controls its entire technology stack, has decades of battery chemistry knowledge built into every component, and is genuinely exploring what becomes possible once all of those advantages point at a single product. Whether a car that can rotate in place solves a problem you personally have on your morning commute is beside the point. It tells you something important about the engineering culture sitting underneath all of this. BYD is not just building cars to meet a standard. It is building cars to find out what a car can actually become. Now, step back, because the bigger picture here is not really about which single brand wins. It is about what happens to an entire industry and to the people who work inside it and buy from it once real competition finally arrives at the technology frontier. American automakers built their identity around the internal combustion engine, the V8, the pickup truck, the muscle car. That identity is real, it is culturally embedded, and it is not going anywhere. But the infrastructure sitting underneath that identity, the factory floors, the supplier networks, decades of engineering focus poured into perfecting combustion, was built for one specific kind of powertrain. Rebuilding all of that for batteries is genuinely difficult, genuinely expensive, and genuinely slow. You cannot simply write a check and make it happen overnight. Several major American automakers have already poured tens of billions of dollars into electric vehicle development and still have not matched BYD's cost structure. Expertise compounds over time, the way interest compounds in a bank account. It also erodes over time when it is neglected, and rebuilding it from scratch is almost always harder than building it the first time around. BYD never had to pivot into this era. Batteries have been their entire world since 1995. The electric vehicle era is not some late adaptation they are scrambling to catch up with. It is the exact environment they were built for from the very beginning. That is a structural advantage measured in decades, and it does not simply disappear because a competitor finally starts spending real money to catch up. The tariff wall protecting American manufacturers is real, and it is buying them genuine time. That time has real value. The question that will define the next decade of the American auto industry is what they choose to do with it. Whether they use that window to actually close the technology and cost gap, or whether they use it to push the hardest decisions a little further down the road. Trade relationships shift. Political priorities change. Factories get built on the favorable side of borders when the right opportunity appears. The companies that use this window to genuinely improve will be ready to compete in the next decade. The ones that simply hope the wall holds forever risk a very uncomfortable wake-up call somewhere down the line. BYD's founder has said the company's ambition is not to be the biggest car company in China. It is to be the biggest car company in the world. A few years ago, that statement sounded like pure ambition. Today, given what has already happened, it sounds a lot more like a schedule the company is already running ahead of. And here is the version of this story that actually ends well for everyone, not just for one brand. More serious competition at the technology frontier means faster progress across the entire industry. 5-minute charging will pressure every charging network on the planet to start closing that gap. Free driver assistance technology on a $10,000 car will force every other manufacturer to explain why they still charge thousands of dollars for similar features. A car that costs $10,000 and delivers genuinely modern technology, even if it never sells anywhere near your zip code, quietly resets the price expectation sitting in every buyer's mind, and every manufacturer eventually has to reckon with that shift, whether they like it or not. Competition, even from behind a tariff wall, tends to make the cars you can actually walk into a dealership and buy better and cheaper over time. American consumers are already benefiting from that dynamic, whether they realize where the pressure originally came from or not. And if, or when, BYD eventually finds a path into the American market, whether through a factory in Mexico, a shift in trade policy, or some partnership structure that has not even been announced yet, the brands that spent this window genuinely building better products will be ready to compete on equal footing. The ones that spent it hoping the wall would hold forever are going to have a very difficult conversation with their shareholders. That is the real story here. Not a scare story, and not a doomsday prediction. A company that was born inside a small battery workshop, built through decades of patient, deliberate vertical integration, sharpened by relentless engineering obsession, is now moving at a speed that is quietly forcing the entire global auto industry to keep up. And the person sitting in the middle of all of it, the ordinary car buyer trying to figure out what to drive next, benefits either way the story unfolds from here.